Her family kicked her out with her daughter, never knowing a billionaire who secretly loved her was still waiting for her. Hi, my beautiful, precious family. It's your Mr. Peter. How are you all? Today I speak not just as a storyteller, but as someone who deeply, truly loves you. Thank you for 30,000 hearts. You didn't just subscribe and you stayed. You listened, you cared, and I will never forget that. But right now, my heart feels tender. My channel is struggling. Views are down, watch time is dropping, and a part of me feels like I'm slowly being forgotten. Is it the writing? Is it that you miss my voice? Or maybe I'm not reaching you the way I used to. Please understand. My family. I'm not walking away, but I need a few quiet days to pray, to gather strength, to remember why I started. In 3 to 5 days I'll return, not just to narrate, but to pour my soul into every word again. And before I pause, let me leave you with this prayer, a prayer full of love, full of grace, full of everything I wish for you right now. I pray that peace flows into your spirit like soft rain after a long drought, that every hidden wound inside you begins to gently heal, that love comes back in unexpected kindness, in still moments, in people who see you when you feel invisible. May the weight you carry feel lighter, may your heart feel safer, and may you never forget, you're not alone, you're not too late, and you are endlessly, completely, beautifully loved. If you want me back, if my voice still matters to your heart, please like this video and comment. We want our Mr. Peter back. I'm not giving up, I'm just stepping back so I can come back stronger, softer, and even closer to you. With all the love in my heart. Forever yours, Mr. Peter.
Chapter 1. When Love Lived in Young Hearts. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room, but theirs began with a collision of hearts, books, and destiny on a rain-soaked September morning that would change everything. The autumn leaves danced through the Columbia University courtyard like golden confetti, each one carrying whispers of dreams and promises that seemed as eternal as the stars above. Mina Pouille pressed her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice against her chest, her heart racing not from the October chill, but from the anticipation of seeing him again. Matthew Cooke had promised to meet her under their oak tree at sunset, and she had been counting the minutes since their morning philosophy class ended. 15 years ago, when love was young and the world felt infinite, Mina believed in forever. She was 21. A brilliant literature student with dreams bigger than her modest family's means, and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had learned early that love was both the greatest gift and the greatest risk. Her scholarship covered tuition, but she worked nights at the campus library to afford textbooks and the small luxuries that made college life bearable. Matthew was everything she never expected to fall for, the heir to Cooke Shipping Industries, a business empire that commanded respect across 3 continents. But when he'd literally collided with her that first day, sending her books flying across the wet pavement, he hadn't looked like a billionaire's son. He'd looked like a boy who'd found something precious in the scattered pages of her fallen novels. "I'm so sorry," he had said, kneeling in the rain to gather her soggy textbooks. "Please let me replace these." "They're just books," she had replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Books were her escape, her education, her everything. "No," he had said, looking up at her with eyes the color of storm clouds. "They're your dreams, and dreams are never just anything." That was the moment Mina Pouille fell in love with Matthew Cooke, though she wouldn't admit it for another 3 weeks. Now, 6 months later, their love had become the stuff of campus legend. They were inseparable, studying together in the library until closing time, sharing late-night conversations about everything and nothing, dreaming of a future that felt as solid as the ground beneath their feet. Matthew would surprise her with handwritten poetry tucked between the pages of her textbooks, each poem more beautiful than the last. She would read to him for hours under their oak tree, her voice bringing classic literature to life in ways that made his business classes seem utterly meaningless. "You make words come alive," he would tell her, his head in her lap as she read aloud from Jane Austen or Emily Dickinson. "You make everything come alive." Their favorite spot was the university rooftop, accessible only through a maintenance door that Matthew had somehow procured a key for. It was their secret sanctuary where they would spread blankets and count stars, making plans for a future that seemed as infinite as the night sky above them. "When we graduate," Matthew would say, his fingers intertwined with hers, "I want to travel with you. Show you Paris, London, Tokyo. Not because I can afford it, but because I want to see the world through your eyes." "And I want to teach," Mina would reply, her head on his shoulder. "Maybe write a novel someday, something about love that conquers all." "You already are," he would whisper, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're writing it with me." But their love story wasn't just about romantic moonlight and whispered promises. It was built on deeper foundations, shared values, mutual respect, and an understanding that transcended their different backgrounds. Matthew never flaunted his wealth, never made Mina feel lesser for her humble origins. Instead, he seemed to find strength in her resilience, inspiration in her determination. "You're going to change the world," he would tell her after she'd spent hours helping struggling students in the writing center. "You have this way of seeing the best in people, of making them believe in themselves." "We're going to change the world," she would correct him. "Together." The night that would haunt them both for the next 15 years began like any other. It was late May, just weeks before graduation, and the campus was buzzing with excitement about finals, job interviews, and the future. Matthew had been unusually quiet all day, and Mina sensed something was weighing on his mind. "Meet me on the rooftop tonight," he had said after their last class together. "There's something I need to tell you." As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Mina climbed the familiar stairs to their sanctuary. Matthew was already there, pacing nervously, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "I love you," he said the moment she appeared, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." "I love you too," she replied, confused by his urgency. "Matthew, what's wrong?" He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Mina's world tilted on its axis. Inside was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen, not ostentatious or flashy, but elegant and timeless, with a single diamond that caught the dying light like a captured star. "Marry me," he said, his voice breaking. "I know we're young, I know we're still in school, but I can't imagine my life without you. I don't want to imagine it." Tears streamed down Mina's face as she nodded, unable to speak. The ring fit perfectly, and as Matthew slipped it onto her finger, he pulled out something else, a simple silver bracelet, engraved with words that would echo in her heart for years to come. "Until stars fall, my heart is yours," he read aloud, fastening the bracelet around her wrist. "This is my promise to you, Mina. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, my heart will always be yours." They made love that night under the stars, their bodies and souls intertwined in a way that felt sacred, eternal. As Mina lay in Matthew's arms, watching the city lights twinkle below, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "We're going to have the most beautiful life," she whispered against his chest. "We already do," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "We already do." For the next 5 years, Matthew would search for her, hiring private investigators, traveling to every city where she might have gone, never understanding why she had left. He would build his empire, honor his father's expectations, and become the billionaire the world expected him to be. But he would never stop loving the girl who had made words come alive, who had made everything come alive. And Mina would spend those same 5 years learning that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away, even when it destroys you. She would carry his memory like a sacred flame, never knowing that somewhere in the world, a man with storm cloud eyes was still counting stars and whispering her name to the wind. Their love story had ended, but the love itself would prove to be as eternal as the stars they had once counted together. Some promises once made can never be broken, no matter how much time passes, no matter how much pain intervenes. Until stars fall, their hearts would always belong to each other. Chapter 2. The Broken Trust. They say the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. He comes disguised as everything you've ever wanted, and Barb Johnson wore his mask so perfectly that even angels would have been fooled. 8 years after walking away from the only man she'd ever truly loved, Mina Pouille stood in a wedding dress that felt more like a prison uniform than a celebration. The church was filled with people she barely knew, witnesses to a marriage that felt more like a business transaction than a union of souls. But she was 29, tired of being alone, and Barb Johnson had promised her everything she thought she wanted: stability, security, and a love that wouldn't ask her to sacrifice her dreams. How catastrophically wrong she had been. The first red flag should have been the way Barb had swept into her life like a hurricane, overwhelming her with attention and gifts after just 2 weeks of dating. But Mina had been working double shifts at a small Brooklyn diner, her literature degree proving worthless in the real world, and his devotion had felt like salvation. "You're wasting your talent in that place," Barb had said, watching her count tips after another 14-hour shift. "Let me take care of you. Let me give you the life you deserve." He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that charmed everyone he met. He worked in construction, owned his own company, and talked about building their future together with the same confidence he used to discuss blueprints and building codes. "I'm going to build you a house," he had promised during their whirlwind courtship. "White picket fence, big backyard for the kids we'll have, everything you've ever dreamed of." What he had built instead was a prison with invisible bars. The changes began slowly, so subtly that Mina didn't recognize them as warning signs. First, he convinced her to quit her job at the diner. "You don't need to work anymore, baby. I make enough for both of us." Then he suggested she stop seeing her few remaining friends. "They're just jealous of what we have. Why do you need them when you have me?" The isolation was gradual but complete. Barb would pout when she wanted to visit her mother, sulk when she mentioned missing her old colleagues, and gradually it became easier to just stay home than to deal with his emotional manipulation. "I just love you so much," he would say when she questioned his possessiveness. "I can't stand the thought of sharing you with anyone else." Mina had mistaken his jealousy for love, his control for protection. She had been so starved for affection, so desperate to build a life that felt stable, that she had ignored every instinct screaming at her to run. The emotional abuse escalated after their wedding. Barb would criticize her cooking, her appearance, her intelligence. He would compare her to other women, always finding her lacking. When she tried to defend herself, he would gaslight her, making her question her own memories and perceptions. "You're too sensitive," he would say when she cried. "I'm just trying to help you be better." The financial abuse was more subtle but equally devastating. Barb controlled every penny, giving her a small allowance for groceries and household expenses, but never enough for her own needs. He monitored her purchases, questioned every transaction, and made her feel guilty for wanting anything beyond basic necessities. When Mina discovered she was pregnant with Diane, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe a baby would soften Barb's harder edges, bring out the loving man she had glimpsed during their courtship. Maybe becoming a father would make him the partner she still desperately wanted him to be. Instead, it made everything infinitely worse. Barb resented the attention the pregnancy required, the medical bills, The way Mina's body changed, he would make cruel comments about her weight, her mood swings, her constant complaining. When she was put on bed rest during her final trimester, he acted like it was a personal inconvenience. "Great," he had said when the doctor explained the restrictions. "Now I have to take care of you too." The day Diane was born should have been the happiest of Mina's life. Holding her daughter for the first time, seeing those perfect tiny fingers and toes, feeling that overwhelming rush of maternal love. It was like discovering a part of herself she never knew existed. But even in the hospital, Barb's behavior was troubling. He seemed uncomfortable around the baby, annoyed by her cries, impatient with the learning process that came with new parenthood. "Can't you make her stop crying?" he would demand in the middle of the night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." As Diane grew from infant to toddler, Barb's resentment became more obvious. He would leave the room when she cried, refuse to help with diaper changes or feeding, and treat childcare as exclusively Mina's responsibility. "I work all day," he would say when Mina begged for help. "The least you can do is handle one little kid." But it was more than just neglect. Barb began to use Diane as another tool of control, another way to manipulate and hurt Mina. He would threaten to take the child away if Mina didn't comply with his demands, or he would lavish attention on Diane only when he wanted to make Mina feel guilty about something. "She loves her daddy more than mommy," he would taunt when 3-year-old Diane would run to him for candy or treats. "Maybe that's because daddy doesn't spend all day crying and complaining." The psychological abuse was relentless. Barb would undermine Mina's confidence as a mother, criticize her parenting decisions, and make her feel like she was failing at the most important job in the world. When she tried to discipline Diane, he would countermand her decisions. When she set boundaries, he would override them. "You're too soft," he would say. "That kid needs a firm hand." But when Mina tried to be firmer, he would accuse her of being too harsh. Nothing she did was ever right, and slowly she began to believe that maybe he was correct. Maybe she was a terrible mother, a terrible wife, a terrible person. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March when Diane was 5 years old. Mina had been struggling with a migraine all day, and Diane was being particularly challenging, refusing to eat dinner, throwing toys, having one of those tantrums that all children have but exhausted parents struggle to handle patiently. "I said eat your vegetables," Mina had said, her voice strained with pain and frustration. "No," Diane had shouted back, pushing her plate off the table. "I don't want to." Before Mina could react, Barb had stormed into the kitchen, his face twisted with rage. "That's enough," he had roared, raising his hand toward the startled child. "Don't you dare!" Mina had jumped between them, her maternal instincts overriding years of conditioning. "Don't you dare touch her." The hand that had been aimed at Diane connected with Mina's face instead, the sharp crack of the slap echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. Diane began to cry, and Mina stood there, touching her burning cheek, realizing that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. "Look what you made me do," Barb had said, his voice cold and unrepentant. "This is your fault." That night, after Barb had gone to bed, Mina sat in Diane's room, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, her little face still tear-stained from the evening's trauma. For the first time in years, Mina's mind was crystal clear. She had survived the emotional abuse, the financial control, the constant criticism. She had endured years of having her spirit slowly crushed, her confidence systematically destroyed. But she would not, could not, allow her daughter to grow up thinking that this was what love looked like. "I'm going to get us out of here," she whispered to her sleeping child. "I promise, baby. Mama's going to make this right." The next morning, while Barb was at work, Mina packed 2 suitcases with their essentials. She had saved a small amount of money over the years, hiding it in a coffee can in the back of the pantry. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy them a few days in a motel while she figured out their next steps. When Barb came home to find them gone, he became dangerous. He called constantly, showed up at her temporary workplace, threatened to take Diane away if she didn't come home. He hired lawyers, filed custody papers, and made her life a living hell. But the worst betrayal came from her own family. Mina's mother, Margaret, had never approved of her daughter's choices. When Mina arrived at her childhood home with Diane and their suitcases, begging for temporary shelter, Margaret's response was cold and judgmental. "You made your bed. Now lie in it," her mother had said, arms crossed, standing in the doorway like a sentinel. "Marriage is work, Mina. You can't just run away when things get difficult." "He hit me, Mom," Mina had said, her voice breaking. "He was going to hit Diane." "Men get frustrated sometimes," Margaret had replied, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Maybe if you were a better wife, a better mother, he wouldn't have to discipline you." The door had slammed in their faces, leaving Mina and 5-year-old Diane standing on the porch with nowhere to go. It was the moment Mina realized that she truly was alone in the world, that she could count on no one but herself to protect her daughter. That night, in a homeless shelter, Mina held her sleeping daughter close and made a vow that would sustain her through the darkest years ahead. "I will never let anyone hurt you," she whispered into Diane's soft hair. "I will work every day, fight every battle, sacrifice everything I have to make sure you grow up, knowing what real love looks like. You will never accept less than you deserve, because you'll know what you deserve." Miles away, in a penthouse apartment he had purchased in hopes of one day sharing it with a woman who had vanished from his life, Matthew Cooke stood at his window, looking out at the city lights. He had become everything the world expected him to be: successful, wealthy, powerful. But he was also alone, carrying the memory of a love that had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had no idea that the woman he still loved was fighting the battle of her life, that she was discovering strength she never knew she possessed, that she was learning the difference between love and manipulation, between protection and control. Both of them were being forged in fires that would either destroy them or make them strong enough to handle the love they had once shared. The broken trust of family, of marriage, of the world's promises was teaching them both what they truly valued, what they were willing to fight for, and what they deserved. The girl who had once believed in fairy tales was becoming a woman who would create her own happy ending. And the boy who had once promised her the world was becoming a man worthy of keeping that promise. Their paths would cross again, but first they both had to learn who they were when everything else was stripped away. They had to become the people they were meant to be, not just for each other, but for themselves, and for the little girl who would teach them both that love wasn't just about romance, but about sacrifice, protection, and the courage to keep fighting even when the whole world seemed against you. Chapter 3: The Strength of a Mother's Love. They say diamonds are formed under pressure, but Mina Pouille learned that mothers are forged in fire, and she was about to become the most precious gem the world had ever seen. 5 years after walking away from the nightmare that was Barb Johnson, Mina stood in the bathroom of their tiny Brooklyn apartment at 4:47 a.m., splashing cold water on her face and trying to summon the energy for another day. Her reflection looked back at her with tired eyes, but there was something else there, too. A strength that hadn't existed during her marriage, a fierce determination that had been born the moment she chose her daughter over her own comfort. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. But it was theirs, paid for with money she had earned through sheer determination and countless hours of work. The walls were painted in cheerful yellow, Diane's favorite color, and covered with her daughter's artwork, library books, and photographs of their small but mighty family of 2. "Mama?" Diane's sleepy voice called from the bedroom they shared. At 8 years old, she was already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and resilience, but she was still young enough to need comfort in the early morning hours. "I'm here, baby," Mina whispered, padding softly to the bed where her daughter was rubbing her eyes. "Mama has to go to work, but Mrs. Rodriguez will walk you to school, remember?" Diane nodded, wrapping her arms around Mina's neck. "Will you be at the restaurant when I get home?" "I'll be there," Mina promised, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. "We'll do homework together, and maybe Ember will let you help make cookies for the dessert special." These moments were what kept Mina going through the exhaustion, the worry, the constant financial pressure. Diane was her North Star, her reason for getting up every morning and pushing through another day. Everything she did was for this little girl who had inherited her mother's love of books and determination, but thankfully none of Barb's cruelty. Mina worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, a schedule that would have broken most people but had become her normal. From 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., she cleaned offices in Manhattan, taking the subway before dawn and scrubbing floors, emptying trash, and sanitizing bathrooms for companies that never saw her face. The work was hard on her body, but it was honest, and it paid enough to cover rent and utilities. From 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., she waitressed at Ember's Kitchen, a small restaurant in their neighborhood that had become their sanctuary. Ember Vale, the owner, was a 60-year-old woman with silver hair and a grandmother's heart, who had taken one look at Mina and Diane 5 years ago and decided they were family. "You remind me of myself at your age," Ember had said during Mina's interview, watching how carefully she handled the dishes, how she smiled at customers despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Single mother, no family support, just trying to make it day by day. "You're hired and your daughter is welcome here any time." The restaurant had become their second home. Diane would come there after school, doing homework at a corner booth while Mina worked, charming the regular customers with her bright smile and precocious conversation. The kitchen staff spoiled her with special treats, and Ember treated her like the granddaughter she'd never had. After her shift at the restaurant, Mina would come home and work on freelance writing projects until 2 or 3 a.m. She wrote product descriptions for online retailers, blog posts for small businesses, and occasionally, when she was very lucky, she would get to ghostwrite romance novels for authors who had the platform but not the time. Those projects paid the best and reminded her why she had once dreamed of being a writer. The schedule was brutal, but it was working. Slowly, painfully, Mina was building a life for herself and Diane. They had health insurance through her restaurant job, a small savings account that grew by $20 or $30 each month. And most importantly, they had each other. "Tell me the story about the brave princess," Diane would whisper on nights when she couldn't sleep, usually when thunderstorms rattled their windows or when she was worried about something at school. Mina would sit on the edge of their shared bed and weave tales of a princess who wasn't born into royalty, but earned her crown through kindness, courage, and an unbreakable spirit. The princess in her stories didn't need a prince to save her. She saved herself and everyone she loved through the power of her own determination. "The brave princess lived in a small kingdom," Mina would begin, her voice soft in the darkness. "She didn't have a castle or servants or fancy gowns. But she had something more valuable than all the gold in the world. She had a heart full of love and the courage to fight for what mattered most." "Was she scared sometimes?" Diane would ask, because even at 8 she was perceptive enough to understand that her mother's life wasn't easy. "Oh yes," Mina would reply, smoothing her daughter's hair. "She was scared lots of times, but being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right even when you're afraid. And do you know what made her the bravest of all?" "What?" "She was fighting not just for herself, but for someone she loved more than life itself. Love makes us stronger than we ever thought possible." These bedtime stories weren't just entertainment. They were lessons. ways of teaching Diane that they might be poor, they might be struggling, but they were also brave and strong and worthy of respect. Mina was determined that her daughter would grow up knowing her own worth, understanding that love should never hurt, and believing that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. The challenges were constant. There were nights when Mina would sit at their tiny kitchen table, surrounded by bills, trying to figure out how to stretch their grocery budget until the next paycheck. There were mornings when she would wake up with a fever or a migraine, but still drag herself to work because they couldn't afford for her to miss a day. There were parent-teacher conferences where she felt inadequate compared to the other mothers with their perfect clothes and stay-at-home schedules. But there were also moments of pure joy that made every struggle worthwhile. Like the day Diane won the school reading contest and ran into the restaurant shouting, "Mama, I won! I won!" like she had just conquered the world. Or the evening when Mina found a note in her jacket pocket that read, "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Thank you for taking care of me. Love, Diane," written in her daughter's careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Where did you learn to write such beautiful words?" Mina had asked, tears streaming down her face. "From you," Diane had replied simply. "You're the best writer in the whole world." The hardest part wasn't the work or the money or the constant exhaustion. The hardest part was the loneliness. Mina hadn't dated since leaving Bob, hadn't even been tempted to. The idea of trusting another man, of letting someone into their carefully constructed world, seemed impossible. "Don't you want to fall in love again?" Ember would ask sometimes, watching Mina turn down yet another customer who had asked for her phone number. "I had my chance at love," Mina would reply, unconsciously touching the spot on her wrist where Matthew's bracelet had once rested. "I gave my heart to someone who deserved it, and then it was destroyed by someone who didn't. I won't make that mistake again." "But honey," Ember would say gently, "not all men are like Bob. There are good ones out there, men who would treat you and Diane like the treasures you are." Mina would just shake her head. "I can't risk it. What if I choose wrong again? What if I bring someone into our life who hurts her? I'd rather be alone than take that chance." What Mina didn't know was that she wasn't as alone as she thought. Every day, in boardrooms and business meetings across the city, a man with storm cloud eyes would pause sometimes and wonder what had happened to the girl who used to read to him under the oak tree. Matthew Cooke had become everything the world expected him to be: successful, wealthy, powerful. But he carried an emptiness that all his achievements couldn't fill. He had never married, never even come close. He told himself it was because he was too busy building his empire, too focused on his goals to settle down. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He was still in love with a woman who had vanished from his life 15 years ago, and no one else had ever made him feel even a fraction of what she had. His penthouse apartment was beautiful but sterile, filled with expensive art and furniture, but lacking the warmth that comes from being truly lived in. He worked long hours, traveled constantly, and threw himself into his business with the kind of intensity that worried his friends and concerned his employees. "You need to find someone," his assistant, Zara, would tell him sometimes. "You're successful, you're handsome, you're rich. Women would line up for a chance to date you." "I'm not looking for someone," Matthew would reply, his attention seemingly focused on the reports on his desk. "I'm fine on my own." But he wasn't fine. He was existing, not living. He had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't. He had achieved his father's dreams, but abandoned his own. And late at night, when the city was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts, he would stand at his window and remember what it felt like to be truly happy, truly alive, truly loved. Neither of them knew that they were living parallel lives just miles apart, both shaped by the same love, both carrying the same emptiness. Matthew in his penthouse, Mina in her tiny apartment, both of them raising walls around their hearts for different reasons, but with the same result. They were protecting themselves from the very thing they both desperately needed. But love has a way of finding a path, even through the highest walls, even across the greatest distances. And sometimes the universe conspires to bring two people together, not when they're looking for love, but when they're finally ready to receive it. The little girl who called Mina Mama and brought sunshine into her darkest days was about to become the bridge between two broken hearts. Diane, with her innocent wisdom and boundless love, would soon play a role in a love story that had been paused for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to begin again. Because some love stories aren't about finding someone new. They're about finding your way back to the person you were always meant to be with, when you're both finally strong enough to handle the love you share. And Mina Pouille, who had learned to be strong enough to carry the world on her shoulders, was about to discover that she was also strong enough to love again, not because she needed someone to complete her, but because she had finally become complete enough to share her wholeness with another soul. The brave princess in her bedtime stories was about to get her happy ending, and it would be more beautiful than any fairy tale she had ever imagined. Chapter 4. When Destiny Calls Your Name. Some moments are so powerful they split time into two distinct periods, everything that came before and everything that comes after. And for Matthew Cooke, Thursday, March 15th, 7:43 p.m. would forever be the moment his life began again. The rain hammered against the windows of the black sedan as Matthew Cooke loosened his tie and rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had been building all day. Another merger completed, another competitor absorbed into the Cooke empire, another step toward the kind of success that should have made him feel victorious. Instead, he felt hollow, as if each achievement only emphasized the emptiness that had become his constant companion. "Sir?" His driver, James, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Would you like me to take you home?" Matthew looked out at the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn, at the small shops and restaurants that lined the avenue like colorful beads on a string. This wasn't his neighborhood. He lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, in a world of doormen and marble lobbies, and spaces so pristine they felt more like museums than homes. "Pull over," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the decision. "I'll walk from here." The rain hit him like a baptism as he stepped onto the sidewalk, soaking through his expensive suit within seconds. He should have felt miserable, should have regretted the impulsive decision to abandon his warm, dry car. Instead, he felt more alive than he had in months. He walked without direction, letting the rain wash away the day's frustrations, the week's disappointments, the year's accumulated numbness. The neighborhood around him was vibrant despite the weather, people hurrying home from work, children splashing in puddles, the warm glow of family dinners visible through apartment windows. He turned a corner and found himself in front of a small restaurant with steamed windows and a hand-painted sign that read, "Ember's Kitchen." The warm light spilling onto the wet pavement looked like a beacon, and without thinking, he pushed open the door. The restaurant was cozy and crowded, filled with the kind of authentic atmosphere that no amount of money could buy. The walls were covered with local artwork, the tables were mismatched but clean, and the air was rich with the scent of home-cooked food and fresh bread. "Welcome to Embers," called a cheerful voice from behind the counter. "Just grab any open table, honey. Someone'll be right with you." Matthew found a small table near the window and settled into the worn but comfortable chair. For the first time in months, he felt himself relax, felt the constant tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He was studying the menu when he heard a familiar laugh. His head snapped up, his heart suddenly racing, because he knew that laugh. He had carried the memory of it for 15 years, had heard it in his dreams, had searched for it in every crowded room and busy street. She emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming plates, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her movements graceful despite the obvious fatigue in her shoulders. She was even more beautiful
Mina
than
smiled
he remembered.
and tucked her
Her face
notepad
into
into
her
her
apron,
apron,
gained character
Great
and
choice.
strength. But
I'll
her
get that
eyes
coffee
still
right
held
out
that
to you.
spark of intelligence
She
and
started
warmth
to turn
that at
away,
first
and
captured
Matthew
his
felt
heart.
panic rising in his
Mina
chest.
Pouille.
He couldn't
The
let
love
her
of his
go,
life,
couldn't let this
the
moment
woman who had
pass
vanished
without
from
at
his
least
world
trying
without
to make her
explanation,
remember.
leaving him with
Mina,
nothing but
he
questions
said,
and
his
a
voice
silver
stronger
bracelet
now,
that he
carrying
still kept in
across
his
the
bedroom
noise of the
drawer.
restaurant like a prayer.
Matthew's hands trembled
stopped,
as he watched
turned
her
back,
move between
and for
the
a moment,
tables,
just a moment,
chatting with customers.
something flickered in her
refilling
eyes.
water glasses,
Recognition,
her smile
memory,
lighting up the room.
hope. He couldn't
Yes,
breathe,
she
couldn't
said,
think,
her voice
couldn't do
suddenly
anything but
uncertain.
stare at the woman
It's
who
me,
had shaped
Matthew
every day
said,
of the
his
last
heart
15
hammering
years.
against his ribs.
She was thinner
Matthew,
than he remembered.
Matthew
her
Cooke.
clothes simple
The
and
notepad
practical.
slipped from her fingers,
There was something about
clattering
her
to
that
the
seemed
floor as her face
stronger,
went pale,
more confident.
Her hand flew
This
to her
wasn't the
throat,
uncertain
and she took a
college
step
girl
backward,
he had fallen in
her
love
eyes
with.
wide with shock.
This was a
and
woman
something
who
that
had been
looked like
tested
fear.
by life and
No,
emerged victorious.
she whispered, shaking her head.
Mina
No,
approached a
you
table
can't
of
be here.
elderly customers.
This isn't real.
Her manner warm
Mina,
and attentive
please.
as she took their order.
But she was already
She
backing
laughed
away.
at something one
Her
of them
movements
said,
jerky
and the sound
panicked.
hit Matthew like a
The
physical
tray
blow.
she had been carrying crashed
turned
to the
toward
floor,
his section of the
plates
restaurant,
shattering,
and
food
Matthew's breath
scattering
caught in
across
his
the
throat.
worn linoleum.
This was it.
The sound
This
echoed
was the
through the
moment he had
restaurant like a
dreamed of,
gunshot,
planned
and
for,
suddenly
hoped
every
for,
conversation
through countless
stopped.
sleepless
Every
nights.
eye turned toward
But as
them.
her eyes swept
I can't,
across the
Mina
dining
said,
room,
her voice
they passed
breaking.
right over him
I
without
can't do
recognition.
this.
She
She
was
turned
looking
and
at him,
fled
but
toward
she
the
wasn't
kitchen,
seeing him.
leaving Matthew
He was just
standing in the
another
middle of the
customer,
restaurant,
another stranger
surrounded
in a
by broken
restaurant full
dishes
of
and the
strangers.
curious stares of strangers.
Mina approached his table.
Mina,
notepad
he
in
called
hand,
after her,
her
his
professional
voice
smile
desperate.
in place.
Mina,
Hi there.
please. Sorry to keep you waiting. I'm Mina, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. What can I get you to drink? Her voice was the same, warm and musical, but there was no recognition in her eyes, no spark of memory. She was being polite, professional, treating him like any other customer who had wandered in from the rain. I dot. Matthew's voice cracked and he cleared his throat. I'll have coffee, please. Black. Sure thing, Mina said, scribbling on her notepad. And have you had a chance to look at the menu? Tonight's special is the meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. She still didn't recognize him. 15 years had changed him too much. Or perhaps she had simply moved on so completely that the boy she had once loved no longer existed in her memory. The meatloaf sounds perfect, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Mina smiled and tucked her notepad into her apron. Great choice. I'll get that coffee right out to you. She started to turn away, and Matthew felt panic rising in his chest. He couldn't let her go, couldn't let this moment pass without at least trying to make her remember. Mina, he said, his voice stronger now, carrying across the noise of the restaurant like a prayer. She stopped, turned back, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Memory? Hope? Yes, she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. It's me, Matthew said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Matthew Cooke. The notepad slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor as her face went pale. Her hand flew to her throat, and she took a step backward, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, you can't be here. This isn't real. Mina, please. But she was already backing away, her movements jerky and panicked. The tray she had been carrying crashed to the floor, plates shattering, food scattering across the worn linoleum. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot, and suddenly every conversation stopped, every eye turned toward them. I can't, Mina said, her voice breaking. I can't do this. She turned and fled toward the kitchen, leaving Matthew standing in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by broken dishes and the curious stares of strangers. Mina, he called after her, his voice desperate. Mina, please. But she was gone, disappeared behind the swinging kitchen doors, leaving him alone with his shattered hopes. Then, from behind the counter, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached him. This had to be Ember, the owner whose name was on the door. "Are you Matthew Cooke?" she asked quietly, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry about the mess. I'll pay for the damages." "Honey," Ember interrupted, placing a weathered hand on his arm. "You don't need to pay for anything, but you do need to understand something. That girl has been through hell and she's built a good life here, a safe life. If you're going to be part of it, you need to be sure you're here for the right reasons." Matthew looked toward the kitchen doors, hoping for another glimpse of the woman who had turned his world upside down. "I've been looking for her for 15 years. "And now you've found her," Ember said simply. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Matthew could answer, the kitchen doors swung open again, and a little girl emerged, her dark hair in pigtails, her eyes bright with curiosity. She was beautiful, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with features that were unmistakably Mina's, but something else too, a confidence, a spark that reminded him of someone else entirely. "Ember," the little girl said, her voice clear and sweet. "Mama's crying in the kitchen, and she won't tell me why. She just keeps saying, 'He's here,' over and over." Matthew's heart stopped. This was Mina's daughter. This beautiful, bright child was part of the life that Mina had built without him. The little girl noticed him staring and walked over with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Are you the man who made my mama cry?" she asked, her head tilted to one side. I hope not," Matthew said, kneeling down to her level. "I'm an old friend of your mother's. My name is Matthew." "I'm Diane," the girl said, studying his face with startling intensity. "Are you the Matthew? What do you mean?" Diane glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer and whispered, "Mama has a picture of you in her jewelry box. She doesn't know I've seen it, but sometimes when she's really sad, she takes it out and looks at it. Are you the Matthew who made her happy a long time ago?" The words hit Matthew like a physical blow. She had kept a picture of him. After all these years, through marriage and motherhood, and whatever pain had put those shadows in her eyes, she had kept a piece of their love alive. "I hope so," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. Diane nodded solemnly, as if she were making an important decision. "Then you should probably go talk to her. She's been waiting a really long time for you to come back." "Diane, honey, come here," Ember called, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's give your mama a few minutes to collect herself." But Diane ignored her, reaching up to take Matthew's hand with the trusting gesture of a child who had been raised to believe in love and happy endings. "She's scared," Diane said seriously. "Mama's really brave, but she's scared of getting hurt again. You won't hurt her, will you?" "Never," Matthew said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I would never hurt her." Diane smiled, and in that moment, Matthew saw something that took his breath away. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. It was familiar because it was his own. This wasn't just Mina's daughter. This was their daughter. The realization hit him like a tsunami. Diane was his daughter. This beautiful, bright, perfect little girl was his child, and he had missed the first 8 years of her life. "Diane," he said, his voice barely audible. "How old are you?" 8, she said proudly. "I'll be 9 in December." December. 9 months after graduation, 9 months after that last night they had spent together under the stars. The timing was perfect, impossible to ignore. Matthew looked at this child, his child, and felt his heart break and heal at the same time. She was everything he had ever dreamed of and never dared to hope for. "Are you going to stay this time?" Diane asked, looking up at Matthew with eyes that were definitely his own. "Or are you going to leave again and make Mama cry?" "I'm not going anywhere," Matthew said, his voice firm with conviction. "I'm going to stay as long as your mama will let me." Diane smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. "Good," she said simply. "We've been waiting for you." From behind the kitchen doors came the sound of muffled sobs, and Matthew's heart ached with the need to comfort the woman who had given him the greatest gift in the world. But he knew he had to be patient, had to let her come to him when she was ready. 15 years ago, they had been children playing at love, making promises they were too young to keep. Now they were adults, shaped by pain and loss and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving life's storms. If they were going to have a second chance, it would be built on truth, on understanding, on the solid foundation of two people who had learned what really mattered. Matthew looked at his daughter, and felt hope bloom in his chest for the first time in years. They were a family. They had always been a family, and now, finally, they had found their way back to each other. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside Ember's kitchen, something beautiful was beginning. Love had found its way home, and this time, nothing would tear them apart. Chapter 5. The Diamond Heart Reveals Itself. True love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about showing up every day, proving through actions that some promises are worth keeping even when the world tries to break them. Matthew Cooke had built a business empire by being decisive, by taking action, by never hesitating when opportunity presented itself. But as he sat in his car outside Ember's kitchen the next morning, watching the restaurant prepare for another day, he felt more uncertain than he had since he was 21 years old and madly in love with a literature student who read poetry under oak trees. 3 days had passed since the night that changed everything, and Mina hadn't spoken to him. Not a word, not a glance, not even an acknowledgement of his existence. She had asked Ember to handle his section whenever he came in, had disappeared into the kitchen the moment she saw him, had built walls so high and thick that he couldn't even catch a glimpse of the woman he loved. But he kept coming back, every morning for coffee, every afternoon for lunch, every evening for dinner. He didn't push, didn't demand attention, didn't try to force conversations that she clearly wasn't ready to have. Instead, he simply existed in her space, letting his presence speak the words she wasn't ready to hear. "You're playing a dangerous game," Ember had told him yesterday, refilling his coffee cup for the 3rd time in an hour. "That girl's been hurt before. She's not going to make this easy for you." "I don't expect easy," Matthew had replied, his eyes never leaving the kitchen doors. "I expect it to be the hardest thing I've ever done. But she's worth it. They both are." Because that was the other complication, the beautiful, terrifying truth that kept him awake at night. Diane was his daughter. He was certain of it now, had done the math a dozen times, had seen himself in her expressions and her gestures. 8 years old, born 9 months after graduation, with eyes that were unmistakably his own. Mina had been pregnant when she left him. She had been carrying his child, their child, and she had chosen to raise her alone rather than tell him the truth. The questions burned in his chest. Why had she left? Why hadn't she told him? What had driven her to choose such a difficult path when he would have given her everything? But those questions would have to wait. Right now, his priority was proving to both of them that he was worthy of being part of their life. Not because of his money or his success, but because of the man he had become, the father he wanted to be, the love he had never stopped carrying. The restaurant door chimed as he entered, and as always, Diane was the first to notice him. She was sitting at her usual corner booth, homework spread across the table, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on what looked like a math worksheet. "Hi, Matthew," she said without looking up, as if his daily appearances were the most natural thing in the world. "Mama's pretending she doesn't see you again." "That's okay," Matthew said, settling into his regular table by the window. "I'm not going anywhere." And he wasn't. He had rearranged his entire life around these daily visits, had delegated responsibilities to his most trusted employees, had turned down meetings and canceled trips just to be here. The truth was, he had never been more present in his life. For years he had been going through the motions, building success without substance, accumulating wealth without meaning. But here, in this simple restaurant, watching his daughter do homework while the woman he loved moved through her daily routine, he felt more alive than he had in decades. He began to notice things. The way Mina's shoulders tensed when she was tired, how she would unconsciously rub her lower back after hours of carrying heavy trays. The way she would smile at customers even when she was clearly exhausted, how she would slip extra bread rolls to the elderly man who came in every Tuesday and counted his change carefully before ordering. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. She was good, kind, strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with the strength of spirit that comes from surviving life's storms and choosing to keep loving anyway. And she was an incredible mother. Matthew watched her interact with Diane, saw the way her face would light up when her daughter showed her a good grade or a drawing she had made. She was patient and loving, but also firm when necessary, guiding Diane with the kind of wisdom that could only come from someone who had learned life's lessons the hard way. "Mama," Diane said one afternoon, her voice carrying across the restaurant, "can Matthew help me with my math homework? He looks really smart." Mina's response was swift and sharp. "No, baby. You can do it yourself, or I'll help you when I get a break." But Matthew had already seen the problem Diane was struggling with: long division, the kind of mathematical concept that could be tricky for an 8-year-old. Without asking permission, he moved to her table and quietly showed her a different way to approach the problem, using a method that made the process simpler and more logical. "Oh," Diane exclaimed, her face lighting up with understanding. "That makes so much more sense. How did you know that?" "I was good at math when I was your age," Matthew said, careful to keep his voice low so as not to attract Mina's attention. "Sometimes it just takes finding the right way to think about a problem." From that day forward, Diane would subtly bring her homework to his table, and Matthew would quietly help her when Mina wasn't looking. He never overstepped, never tried to replace her mother's authority. But he found himself treasuring these small moments of connection with the daughter he was just getting to know. It was during one of these homework sessions that he learned about Diane's love of art. She had been doodling in the margins of her notebook, creating intricate patterns and small drawings that showed remarkable creativity for a child her age. "These are beautiful," Matthew said, genuinely impressed. "Do you like to draw?" Diane's face lit up. "I love to draw, but we don't have a lot of art supplies at home. Mama says maybe for my birthday, but that's not until December." That night, Matthew visited 3 different art supply stores, carefully selecting the best materials for a young artist. Not the most expensive. He was learning that Mina's pride was fierce, and she wouldn't accept anything that looked like charity, but the best quality within reason. Colored pencils, sketchbooks, watercolors, brushes, and a simple easel that could be folded and stored easily. He had the supplies delivered to the restaurant the next morning with a simple note, "For the artist, from a friend." When Diane discovered the supplies, her squeal of delight could be heard throughout the restaurant. She immediately began creating a masterpiece, her face glowing with the joy that only comes from receiving something you want desperately but never expected to have. Mina's reaction was different. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, staring at the art supplies, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to identify. Finally, she approached Matthew's table, her steps measured and careful. "You can't do this," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Can't do what?" Matthew asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "You can't just buy her things. You can't just show up and start being part of her life. It's not fair to her." "What's not fair is that I've missed the first 8 years of her life," Matthew said, his voice equally quiet but filled with an intensity that made Mina take a step back. What's not fair is that I didn't know I had a daughter until 3 days ago. Mina's face went pale. You don't know that she's mine, Matthew said simply. I know it, you know it, and I think she knows it too. The question is, what are we going to do about it? For a moment, Mina looked like she might say something, might finally have the conversation they needed to have. But then her walls went back up, her expression closed off, and she turned away. We're not going to do anything, she said over her shoulder, because there is no we. But Matthew wasn't discouraged. If anything, her reaction confirmed what he had suspected. She was scared, not indifferent. Fear he could work with. Fear meant she still felt something, meant the love they had shared wasn't completely dead. He began to pay attention to the smaller details of their lives. When he noticed that Mina's work shoes were worn thin and causing her to wince with each step, he anonymously arranged for a beautiful, comfortable pair to be delivered to the restaurant with a note. For the woman who's been walking through storms, you deserve to walk on clouds. When he observed that Diane's backpack was falling apart, held together with duct tape and hope, a new one appeared at her table the next day. Not flashy or expensive looking, but sturdy and perfect for a young student. Each gesture was small, carefully chosen to meet a need without overwhelming them with his wealth. He wasn't trying to buy their love. He was trying to show them that love meant paying attention, noticing the details, caring about their comfort and happiness. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening in late March. Matthew was finishing his dinner when he heard raised voices from the kitchen. Through the service window, he could see Mina on the phone, her face pale and worried. I understand that she's running a fever, Mina was saying, her voice tight with stress. But I can't leave work right now. I'm the only server on tonight, and Matthew was out of his chair before she finished the sentence. He approached the kitchen, ignoring the surprised looks from the staff. What's wrong? He asked Ember, who was standing nearby with a concerned expression. Diane's sick, Ember replied quietly. She's at the after-school program, and they need someone to pick her up. But Mina can't leave. We're short-staffed, and the dinner rush is just starting. Matthew didn't hesitate. I'll go. No, Mina said immediately, hanging up the phone. Absolutely not. I'll figure something out. She needs you, Matthew said simply, and I can help. Let me help. You don't understand, Mina said, her voice breaking slightly. She's my responsibility. She's all I have, and I can't let anything happen to her. She's not all you have, Matthew said, his voice gentle but firm. And nothing is going to happen to her. I'll bring her to you, or I'll take her home, or I'll sit with her until you can get there. Whatever you need. For a moment, Mina looked like she might refuse, but then Ember stepped forward, her voice kind but practical. Honey, that little girl needs her mama. Let Matthew help. You can trust him. The words, you can trust him, seemed to echo in the kitchen, and Matthew saw something shift in Mina's expression. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the maternal instinct that overrode everything else. But finally, she nodded. 20 minutes later, Matthew was kneeling beside a small bed in the nurse's office, gently stroking his daughter's fevered forehead as she slept fitfully. She looked so small and vulnerable, so much like the child he had imagined during all those years of wondering what might have been. Daddy? Diane mumbled, her eyes fluttering open. Is that you? Matthew's heart stopped. She had called him Daddy. This beautiful, sick little girl had called him Daddy, and it was the most wonderful and terrifying thing he had ever heard. I'm here, he whispered, not correcting her, not wanting to break the spell of this moment. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Diane smiled sleepily and closed her eyes, her small hand reaching for his. I knew you'd come, she said. I told Mama you'd come back. As Matthew sat there holding his daughter's hand while she slept, he felt something inside him shift and settle. This was what he had been missing his whole life, not the success or the money or the recognition, but this simple, profound connection to another human being. When Mina burst through the door an hour later, her face wild with worry, she found Matthew and Diane exactly where she had left them, his hand in hers, his voice soft as he read to her from a book someone had left in the nurse's office. "How is she?" Mina asked, her hand immediately going to Diane's forehead. "Better," Matthew said quietly. "The fever broke about 20 minutes ago. She's been sleeping peacefully." Mina nodded, her relief palpable. But as she looked at Matthew, really looked at him for the first time in days, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not love, not yet, but maybe the beginning of trust. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being here, for taking care of her." "Thank you," Matthew replied, his voice thick with emotion, "for letting me." It was a small moment, barely more than a whisper of connection, but it was enough. It was a start. And as they sat together in the quiet nurse's office, watching their daughter sleep, Matthew felt hope bloom in his chest for the first time in 15 years. The diamond heart that had been hidden behind walls of success and isolation was finally beginning to reveal itself, not through grand gestures or expensive gifts, but through the simple act of showing up, of being present, of proving that some kinds of love are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything. Chapter 6. When Love Faces the Storm. Sometimes God whispers, and sometimes he shouts. But when he wants to show you what love really means, he sends you to the edge of losing everything that matters, and then reveals who will stand beside you in the darkness. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in April, piercing through Matthew's sleep like a blade. He fumbled for his phone, his heart already racing with the premonition that something was terribly wrong. "Matthew!" Mina's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears and panic. I don't know who else to call. Diane is sick, really sick, and I'm at the hospital, and I can't—" "Which hospital?" Matthew was already out of bed, reaching for his clothes. "I'm coming." "Brooklyn Methodist," Mina said, her voice breaking. "She can't breathe properly, and they're saying it might be pneumonia, and I'm so scared, Matthew. I'm so scared." "I'm on my way," Matthew said, already heading for the door. "Don't be scared. I'm coming." The drive to Brooklyn felt endless, even though Matthew was breaking every speed limit. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and his mind raced through every worst-case scenario he could imagine. Diane, his daughter, the little girl who had called him daddy and asked him to help with her math homework, was fighting for her breath in a hospital bed. The pediatric ward was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed voices, but Matthew found them easily. He just followed the sound of Mina's quiet sobs. She was curled up in a plastic chair beside a hospital bed where Diane lay connected to oxygen tubes and monitors, her small face pale and drawn. "Mina," Matthew said softly, and she looked up with eyes that were red-rimmed and devastated. "They admitted her," she whispered. "Her oxygen levels dropped, and they had to put her on supplemental oxygen. They're saying it's pneumonia, but they need to run more tests to see how bad it is." Matthew looked at his daughter, so small and fragile in the hospital bed, and felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. This was his child, his baby, and she was suffering while he stood helplessly by. "What can I do?" he asked, sitting down beside Mina. "Tell me what you need." "I need her to be okay," Mina said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I need her to get better. I can't lose her, Matthew. She's everything to me." "She's going to be okay," Matthew said, his voice more confident than he felt. "She's strong, like her mother. She's going to get through this." For the next 18 hours, Matthew didn't leave the hospital. He used his connections to ensure Diane had the best possible care, quietly arranging for the top pediatric pulmonologist in the city to consult on her case. He bought coffee and food that Mina refused to eat, made phone calls to handle the work responsibilities he was ignoring, and most importantly, he stayed. When Mina finally collapsed from exhaustion, curled up in the uncomfortable hospital chair, Matthew gently lifted her and carried her to the small couch in the corner of the room. She was so thin, so fragile in his arms, and he realized how much the stress of single parenthood had cost her. "I can't sleep," she mumbled against his chest, but her eyes were already closing. "I need to watch her." "I'll watch her," Matthew promised, stroking her hair. "I'll stay awake all night if I have to. Rest, Mina. I've got this." And he did. He sat vigil beside Diane's bed, monitoring her breathing, talking to the nurses, and simply being present in a way that he had never been present for anything in his life. This was what mattered, not board meetings or profit margins, but being here for the people he loved when they needed him most. When Diane's fever spiked at 3 a.m., Matthew was the one who called the nurses, who held her hand as they administered medication, who sang softly to her until she fell back asleep. When she woke up scared and confused, he was the one who explained where she was and why, his voice calm and reassuring. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked during one of her lucid moments, her small hand clutching his. "Yes," Matthew said, the word coming out without hesitation. "I'm your daddy, and I love you more than you can imagine." "I love you too," Diane whispered, and then fell back asleep. The crisis came on the second day. Diane's breathing became labored, and the doctors decided she needed to be moved to the intensive care unit. As they wheeled her bed down the hallway, Mina walking beside it with tears streaming down her face, Matthew felt a desperation unlike anything he had ever experienced. In the ICU waiting room, Mina finally broke down completely. The stress, the fear, the exhaustion of the past 2 days crashed over her like a wave, and she collapsed into Matthew's arms, sobbing with the kind of raw grief that comes from facing the possibility of losing everything that gives life meaning. "I can't do this," she cried against his chest. "I can't lose her. She's all I have. She's my whole world." "She's not all you have," Matthew said, his own voice thick with emotion. "You have me. You've always had me, Mina. I'm not going anywhere." "You don't understand," she said, pulling back to look at him with eyes that were wild with fear, and something else, something that looked like guilt. "This is my fault. I kept her from you. I robbed you of 8 years with your daughter because I was scared, because I was stupid, because I thought I was protecting everyone." "Why?" Matthew asked, the question that had been burning in his chest for weeks, finally finding voice. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you tell me about her?" Mina's face crumpled and she sank back into the waiting room chair, her hands covering her face. "Because your family made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for you, because your father threatened to disown you if you married me, because my mother convinced me that I would only hold you back from your destiny." The words hit Matthew like physical blows. "What are you talking about?" "Your father called me," Mina said, her voice muffled by her hands. "The night after you proposed. He offered me money to disappear, told me I was ruining your life, that you would grow to resent me for trapping you in a marriage beneath your station. And my mother, she agreed with him. She said I was being selfish, that if I really loved you, I would let you go." Matthew felt rage building in his chest, hot and pure, and directed at the people who had destroyed their happiness out of prejudice and fear. "And you believed them?" "I was 21 and pregnant and terrified," Mina said, finally looking up at him. "I found out about the baby the morning after I left. I took a pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom in Pennsylvania, and I realized that everything your father had said was true. I was going to trap you, tie you down with responsibilities you never asked for." "Those responsibilities?" Matthew's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean our daughter, the most beautiful, brilliant, amazing child in the world?" "I know that now," Mina said, tears streaming down her face. But then, I was so young, so scared. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was setting you free to become the man you were meant to be. The man I was meant to be, Matthew repeated, his voice bitter. You want to know what kind of man I became without you? I became successful, wealthy, powerful, and completely empty. I spent 15 years building an empire and wondering what the point of it all was. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. I'm sorry, Mina whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm not angry with you, Matthew said, though that wasn't entirely true. Part of him was furious at the choices she had made, at the years they had lost, at the fact that he had missed his daughter's first word, first step, first day of school. But looking at her now, broken and terrified in a hospital waiting room, he couldn't hold on to that anger. I'm angry at the people who made you feel like you had to choose between love and security. I'm angry at a world that made a 21-year-old girl feel like she had to face pregnancy alone. Before Mina could respond, a doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway. Miss Pouille, I have news about Diane. They both stood, holding hands without realizing it, united in their fear and hope. The antibiotics are working, the doctor said with a smile. Her oxygen levels are improving and her fever is down. She's going to be fine. We'll keep her another day or two for observation, but she's out of danger. Mina's knees buckled with relief, and Matthew caught her, holding her as she sobbed with gratitude. Their daughter was going to be okay. Their little girl was going to come home. Can we see her? Matthew asked, his own voice thick with emotion. Of course, the doctor said. She's been asking for her parents. Parents. The word hit Matthew like a gift, like a benediction. He was a parent. He was Diane's father, and she was going to be okay, and they were going to figure out how to be a family. In the ICU room, Diane was awake and alert, her color much improved. When she saw them, her face lit up with a smile that was pure sunshine. "Mama, Daddy," she said, reaching for both of them. "I knew you'd both be here. I knew you wouldn't leave me." "Never," Matthew said, kissing her forehead. "We're never leaving you." "Are we going to be a real family now?" Diane asked with the directness of childhood. "Like in the movies?" Mina looked at Matthew, and he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in 15 years. Hope, love, and the willingness to trust again. "Yes," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. "We're going to be a real family." "Good," Diane said, settling back into her pillows with satisfaction. "I was getting tired of waiting for you two to figure it out." Matthew laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "How did we get so lucky to have such a smart daughter?" "She gets it from her mother," Mina said, and Matthew heard forgiveness in her voice, acceptance and maybe even love. "She gets it from both of us," he corrected, and meant it. Later that evening, as Diane slept peacefully and the crisis had passed, Matthew found himself alone with Mina in the hospital room. She was curled up in the chair beside their daughter's bed, looking more at peace than he had seen her since he had walked back into her life. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything. For leaving, for not telling you about her, for all the years we lost." "I'm sorry too," Matthew said, "for not fighting harder to find you, for not being there when you needed me most, for letting other people's voices drown out what my heart was telling me." "Where do we go from here?" Mina asked, her voice uncertain but hopeful. "Home," Matthew said simply. "We go home. All of us, together." "I don't have much to offer," Mina said. "A tiny apartment, a job that barely pays the bills, a life that's pretty ordinary." "You have everything I need," Matthew said, reaching for her hand. "You have love, you have strength, you have our daughter. You have the heart that I lost 15 years ago and never found again." "And you?" Mina asked. "What do you have to offer?" Matthew smiled, thinking of his penthouse apartment, his business empire, his bank accounts that could buy anything except the things that really mattered. I have the rest of my life, he said, and I want to spend every day of it proving to you and Diane that some promises are worth keeping, that some love is worth waiting for, that some families are worth fighting for. As if she had heard him, Diane stirred in her sleep, a small smile crossing her face. She was going to be okay. They were all going to be okay. The storm had passed, and love had survived, stronger than ever. Matthew looked at his family, his daughter, his soulmate, his second chance at everything that mattered, and felt his heart expand with a joy so pure it was almost painful. They had found each other again, and this time nothing would tear them apart. The diamond heart that had been hidden for so long was finally free to shine, and it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 7. The Family That Chose Cruelty. Evil rarely announces itself with horns and pitchforks. It comes dressed in expensive suits and family names, speaking of tradition and propriety while wielding hatred like a weapon dipped in respectability. The phone in Matthew's penthouse rang at exactly 7:30 a.m., 3 days after Diane had been released from the hospital. He was in the kitchen making pancakes, something he had never done before but was learning because his daughter had mentioned she loved them shaped like stars, when his father's voice cut through the morning peace like a blade. "Matthew, we need to talk, now." Richard Cooke had never been a man who asked for anything. He commanded, demanded, expected immediate compliance. For 36 years, Matthew had danced to his father's tune, built his empire according to his father's vision, lived his life within the boundaries his father had drawn. But that was before Diane had called him daddy, before Mina had trusted him with her heart again, before he had understood what it meant to have something worth fighting for. "I'm busy, Dad," Matthew said, carefully pouring batter into star shapes on the griddle. "Diane's coming over for breakfast, and I don't want to burn her pancakes." The silence on the other end of the line was arctic. "Diane? Are you referring to that woman's bastard child?" The words hit Matthew like a physical blow, and he felt rage rise in his chest, hot and pure and protective. "Don't," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't ever speak about my daughter that way again." "Your daughter?" Richard's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Matthew, you can't seriously believe that child is yours. This woman has obviously done her research, found out about your wealth, and is running the oldest con in the book." "She's mine," Matthew said, his voice firm with conviction. "I've had DNA tests done. Diane is my daughter, and Mina is the woman I'm going to marry. Over my dead body." "If necessary," Matthew replied, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. "But it won't come to that because my personal life is no longer your concern." "Everything about you is my concern," Richard snarled. "You are the heir to the Cooke empire, the face of our family name. I will not allow you to throw away everything we've built for some ghetto trash and her mixed-breed spawn. If you ever speak about my family that way again, I will destroy you. Do you understand me?" "Your family?" Richard's voice was incredulous. "Your family is here, in this house, carrying on a legacy that goes back 4 generations. Your family is not some welfare queen and her bastard child who have clearly targeted you for your money." "I'm done," Matthew said quietly. "I'm done with your expectations, your demands, your hatred. I'm done being the son you wanted instead of the man I am. If you pursue this relationship," Richard said, his voice dripping with venom, "I will cut you off completely. No inheritance, no trust fund, no family name. You'll be nothing." "Good," Matthew said, and realized he meant it. "Because everything I have, I built myself, and everything I am, I'm going to build with them." He hung up the phone and turned back to his pancakes, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of finally standing up to the man who had controlled his life for so long. But he felt lighter, freer, as if he had just dropped a weight he had been carrying without realizing it. Within hours, Richard Cooke had unleashed his full fury on the family that had dared to claim his son. The attack was swift, vicious, and multifaceted, a campaign of destruction designed to obliterate Mina's life and force Matthew back into line. First came the private investigators, men with cold eyes and expensive suits, who began following Mina to work, taking photographs, asking questions about her past. They dug up every detail of her marriage to Barb, her time in the homeless shelter, her struggles as a single mother. They painted a picture of a woman who was desperate, unstable, a gold digger who had targeted Matthew for his wealth. Then came the attacks on her livelihood. Anonymous complaints were filed against Ember's Kitchen, claiming health code violations, tax irregularities, employment law breaches. The restaurant was subjected to surprise inspections, audits, and regulatory harassment designed to shut it down. The social media campaign was perhaps the cruelest. Fake accounts began posting about Mina online, spreading rumors about her past, her relationship with Matthew, her fitness as a mother. They called her a whore, a welfare queen, a woman who had trapped a rich man with a fake pregnancy. "They're saying I'm a prostitute," Mina said one evening, her voice hollow as she stared at her phone. "They're saying I sold my body to get pregnant with your baby." Matthew felt sick with rage and helplessness. "I'll sue them. I'll destroy every single person who—" "You can't sue anonymous accounts," Mina said, her voice defeated. "And even if you could, it doesn't matter. The damage is done. People believe what they want to believe." The attacks escalated when Celeste Cooke, Richard's wife and Matthew's stepmother, decided to get personally involved. She was a woman who had married into wealth and power and wielded both like weapons, and she saw Mina as a threat to everything she had built. Celeste arranged for a chance encounter at the grocery store where Mina shopped, approaching her with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You must be Mina," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Celeste Cooke, Matthew's mother." "Stepmother," Mina corrected quietly, not wanting to cause a scene but unable to let the lie stand. "Of course," Celeste said, her smile turning predatory. "I just wanted to have a little chat with you, woman to woman, about Matthew's future." "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Mina said, trying to move past her. "Oh, but we do," Celeste said, blocking her path. "You see, Matthew is going through a phase, a midlife crisis, if you will. He's romanticizing his past, creating fantasies about true love and happy endings. But reality always wins in the end." "What do you want?" Mina asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I want you to understand your place," Celeste said, her voice turning cold. "You're a waitress from Brooklyn with a bastard child and a history of bad decisions. Matthew is a billionaire from one of the most powerful families in the country. Do you really think this fairy tale is going to last?" "I think you underestimate your stepson," Mina said, finding her strength. "And you definitely underestimate me." "Do I?" Celeste laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. Matthew will play house with you for a while, enjoy the novelty of slumming it with the common folk. But eventually he'll remember who he is, what he's worth, what he stands to lose. And when that happens, he'll drop you like the liability you are." "And if he doesn't?" Mina asked, her chin raised defiantly. "Then we'll make sure he does," Celeste said, her mask finally slipping to reveal the hatred beneath. "We'll destroy your reputation, your livelihood, your ability to provide for that child. We'll make your life so miserable that you'll beg us to let you disappear." "Is that a threat?" Mina asked, her voice stronger now. "It's a promise," Celeste replied. "Matthew is our son, our heir, our future. And we will not let some ghetto trash destroy everything we've built." The confrontation left Mina shaken but not broken. She had faced worse than entitled rich women with too much time and money. She had survived an abusive marriage, homelessness, single motherhood, and the kind of poverty that tests every fiber of your being. She would survive this too. But the attacks on Diane were different. When anonymous calls began being made to Child Protective Services, claiming that Mina was an unfit mother, that she was neglecting her daughter, that she was exposing her to inappropriate situations, Mina's maternal instincts roared to life. "They're trying to take her away from me," she told Matthew, her voice breaking. "They're claiming I'm unfit, that I'm a danger to her." "They can't do that," Matthew said, but even he sounded uncertain. "You're a wonderful mother. Anyone can see that." "Can they?" Mina asked, holding up a letter from CPS. "Because they have statements from concerned citizens claiming I leave her alone at the restaurant, that I don't provide proper medical care, that I'm living with a man I'm not married to." The investigation was thorough and humiliating. Social workers came to their apartment, interviewed Diane at school, questioned Mina's parenting decisions. Every aspect of their life was scrutinized, judged, found wanting by people who had never struggled to put food on the table or keep a roof over their child's head. "I'm scared," Diane whispered to Matthew one evening after a particularly invasive interview. "Are they going to take me away from Mama?" "Never," Matthew said, his voice fierce with protection. "I will never let anyone take you away from your mother." But privately he was terrified. The Cooke family had power, influence, connections that reached into every corner of the legal system. If they were determined to destroy Mina, they had the resources to do it. The breaking point came when someone leaked Diane's medical records from her recent hospital stay, claiming that Mina had neglected her daughter's health, that she had delayed seeking treatment. The story was twisted, manipulated, turned into evidence of maternal neglect rather than the heroic struggle of a single mother doing everything she could to care for her sick child. "They're not just attacking me anymore," Mina told Matthew, her voice hollow with despair. "They're attacking her. They're trying to destroy an 8-year-old child to get to us." "I'll stop them," Matthew said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'll make them pay for every cruel word, every lie, every moment of pain they've caused you." "How?" Mina asked, her eyes searching his face. "They have money, power, influence. What do we have?" "We have the truth," Matthew said, "and we have each other, and sometimes that's enough." But that night, alone in his penthouse, Matthew wondered if love really was enough to fight a family that had turned cruelty into an art form. He thought about his father's threats, his stepmother's promises, the systematic destruction of everything Mina had built. For the first time since finding her again, he wondered if maybe he should walk away. Maybe Mina and Diane would be safer without him, better off without the target that came with loving a cook. But then he remembered Diane calling him Daddy, remembered Mina trusting him with her heart again, remembered the promise he had made under the stars 15 years ago. "Until stars fall, my heart is yours." The stars hadn't fallen. His heart was still hers, and he would fight for his family with every weapon at his disposal, every resource he had built, every ounce of strength in his body. The war was just beginning, but Matthew Cooke had finally found something worth fighting for, and he intended to win. Chapter 8. The Queen Rises. They thought they were fighting a waitress from Brooklyn, but they awakened a queen who had been forged in fire, tempered by struggle, and crowned by love. And queens don't just survive, they conquer. The war room Matthew established in his penthouse looked like something from a political campaign or a military operation. Walls covered with photographs, documents, and flowcharts mapping out the Cooke family's network of influence. His most trusted advisors, lawyers, investigators, public relations specialists, worked around the clock to counter every attack, expose every lie, and build a case so strong that even his father's money couldn't tear it down. But the most powerful weapon in their arsenal wasn't strategy or resources. It was the woman who sat at the center of it all, no longer hiding in the shadows, but standing in the light, ready to fight for her family. "I want to hold a press conference," Mina said on a Thursday morning, her voice steady and determined. "I want to tell our story, the real story, before they can twist it any further." Matthew looked up from the legal documents he had been reviewing, his heart swelling with pride and love. This was the woman he had fallen in love with 15 years ago, but stronger now, refined by suffering into something magnificent. "Are you sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "They'll attack you publicly, tear apart everything you say." "Let them," Mina said, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being ashamed of my story. I survived an abusive marriage, homelessness, single motherhood, and poverty. I raised a brilliant, kind, beautiful daughter while working 3 jobs and never taking a penny of government assistance. I have nothing to be ashamed of." "You're right," Matthew said, moving to stand beside her. "You're absolutely right. And I'll be right there with you." "No," Mina said, her voice gentle but firm. "This is my fight. These are my words to speak. You can support me, but you can't speak for me." The press conference was held at a neutral location, a hotel conference room that held no connection to either the Cooke family or their enemies. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers, all waiting to see what the woman at the center of the scandal would say. Mina entered the room wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her manner calm and composed. She looked like royalty, Matthew thought, like a queen preparing to address her subjects. "My name is Mina Pouille," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I am a mother, a daughter, a survivor, and a woman who has been in love with the same man for 15 years. I am here today to tell you the truth about my life, my choices, and my family." The room fell silent, reporters leaning forward, cameras focusing on her face. 15 years ago, I was a 21-year-old college student who fell in love with a classmate named Matthew Cooke. Our love was real, pure, and powerful. We were engaged to be married, planning a future together, when his family made it clear that I was not acceptable to them. They threatened to disown him if he married me, and they convinced my own family that I was being selfish by staying with him. Mina paused, her eyes finding Matthew in the crowd, drawing strength from his presence. "I made a choice that has haunted me every day since. I chose to walk away, believing that I was protecting him from his family's wrath. What I didn't know at the time was that I was pregnant with his child. I found out the morning after I left him, and I made another choice, to raise our daughter alone rather than use her as a weapon to force a marriage that might ultimately destroy us both." The room erupted in whispers, but Mina continued, her voice never wavering. "For the next 8 years, I raised Diane as a single mother. I worked multiple jobs, lived in a tiny apartment, and struggled to make ends meet. But I never regretted having her, never considered her a burden or a mistake. She was and is the greatest gift of my life." "What about your marriage to Barb Johnson?" a reporter called out. "I married Barb because I was lonely, scared, and desperate for stability," Mina said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "It was a mistake that cost me dearly. He was emotionally and psychologically abusive, and when he threatened to hurt my daughter, I left him. My own family turned their backs on me, telling me I had made my bed and should lie in it." She took a breath, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I spent the next 5 years proving to myself and to my daughter that we could survive anything. I worked as a cleaning lady, a waitress, and a freelance writer. I never took government assistance, never asked for help, never gave up. I taught my daughter that love should never hurt, that she was worthy of respect and kindness, and that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to." "And Matthew Cooke?" another reporter asked. "When did he re-enter your life?" 3 months ago, Matthew walked into the restaurant where I work. Mina said, her voice softening with love. He had been looking for me for years, never knowing about our daughter, never understanding why I had left. When he learned about Diane, he didn't demand custody or threaten legal action. He simply asked if he could be part of our lives. What about the allegations that you're a gold digger, that you're using your daughter to trap a wealthy man? Mina's laugh was clear and genuine. I've been supporting my daughter and myself for 8 years without any help from anyone. I own my own car, pay my own rent, and have never asked Matthew for a single dollar. If I were a gold digger, I would have told him about his daughter 8 years ago and demanded support. Instead, I kept her existence secret until he discovered it himself. Why are you speaking out now? A reporter asked. Because Matthew's family has declared war on me and my daughter, Mina said, her voice turning fierce. They have hired private investigators to follow us, filed false reports with Child Protective Services, and launched a campaign of lies and intimidation designed to destroy our lives. They have called my daughter a bastard, called me a whore, and threatened to take away everything I've worked for. The room was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. I am here today to say that I will not be intimidated, I will not be silenced, and I will not allow anyone to hurt my child. I am not some helpless victim who can be bought off or scared away. I am a mother, and I will fight for my family with every breath in my body. What do you want people to know about your relationship with Matthew Cooke? A reporter asked. I want them to know that love is not about money or social status, Mina said, her eyes finding Matthew's again. Real love is about choosing each other every day, supporting each other through the storms, and building something beautiful together. Matthew and I are not a fairy tale. We are two people who have been tested by life and found each other again when we were finally ready to handle the love we share. The press conference continued for another hour, but Matthew barely heard the remaining questions. He was too busy falling in love all over again with the woman who had just faced down a room full of reporters and emerged victorious. She had been magnificent, regal, absolutely unstoppable. When it was over, when the last reporter had left and the cameras had been turned off, Matthew found Mina in the hotel bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. That was incredible, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You were incredible. I was terrified, Mina admitted, her hands shaking slightly. But I was also angry. How dare they attack our daughter? How dare they try to destroy something beautiful just because they're too small-minded to understand it? You destroyed them, Matthew said, pulling her into his arms. You stood up there and told the truth, and they have no defense against the truth. We're not done yet, Mina said, her voice determined. This was just the beginning. And she was right. The press conference was just the opening salvo in a campaign that would transform not just their lives, but the very foundation of the Cooke family empire. Within hours, the video of Mina's press conference had gone viral. Social media exploded with support for the brave single mother who had faced down a powerful family and refused to be intimidated. Team Mina began trending worldwide, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of survival, single parenthood, and standing up to bullies. But Matthew's revenge was more strategic, more surgical, more devastating than anything his family could have imagined. He had spent 15 years building his business empire, and now he was going to use every connection, every resource, every dollar to protect his family and destroy those who had threatened them. First, he bought the building that housed Ember's kitchen and immediately began renovations, turning it into a community center and restaurant that would serve as a beacon of hope for struggling families. He hired Mina as the director, giving her a salary that reflected her true worth and a platform to help others who had walked her path. Then he established the Diane Cooke Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping single mothers achieve financial independence and educational opportunities. The foundation would provide scholarships, job training, and support services, ensuring that no woman would have to face the struggles Mina had endured alone. But the most beautiful part of his revenge was how he elevated Mina herself. He didn't just defend her, he celebrated her, showcased her strength and intelligence, made it clear that she was not just his girlfriend, but his equal, his partner, his queen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said at the Foundation's launch event, his voice carrying across the packed ballroom, "I want you to meet the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Mina Pouille is not just the love of my life. She is a force of nature, a warrior, a queen who has turned every obstacle into a stepping stone and every setback into a comeback." The applause was thunderous, but Matthew wasn't finished. "This woman worked 3 jobs to raise our daughter alone. She never took charity, never gave up, never let the world's cruelty make her cruel in return. She taught our daughter that love should never hurt, that she was worthy of respect, and that she could accomplish anything. And now she's going to teach the world." Mina stood beside him, radiant in a gown that cost more than she used to make in a month, but wearing it like she had been born to it. Because she had been born to it, not to wealth, but to greatness, to the kind of nobility that comes from character rather than birthright. The war with his family continued, but now it was a different kind of battle. Every attack they launched was met with a counterattack that exposed their cruelty, their prejudice, their fundamental emptiness. Every lie they told was answered with truth that shone like a beacon. The turning point came when Celeste Cooke made a fatal mistake. Frustrated by their inability to destroy Mina publicly, she decided to confront Diane directly, approaching the little girl outside her school with photographers hidden nearby. "Hello, dear," Celeste said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm your daddy's real mother. I want you to know that your mama is keeping you from your real family." But Diane was Mina's daughter, raised to be strong and smart and unafraid of bullies, no matter how expensively they were dressed. "My mama says that real family is the people who love you no matter what," Diane said, her voice clear and confident. "And real mamas don't call little girls names or try to hurt their feelings, so I don't think you're anybody's real mama." The exchange was caught on camera, not by Celeste's photographers, but by a parent who had recognized the woman harassing a child. The video went viral within hours, showing the world exactly who they were dealing with. A wealthy woman so desperate to destroy a family that she would attack an 8-year-old child. The backlash was swift and devastating. Celeste was pilloried in the media, called out by child advocacy groups, and condemned by people across the political spectrum. The Cooke family's reputation, built over generations, crumbled in the face of their own cruelty. That evening, when Matthew knelt beside Diane in their living room, because Mina and Diane had moved in with him, not to his penthouse, but to a beautiful house in Brooklyn, where they could be a real family. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood up to someone who was trying to hurt you and your mama, and you did it with grace and intelligence." "She was mean," Diane said simply. "But Mama always says that hurt people, so maybe she's just sad inside." "You're right," Matthew said, marveling at his daughter's wisdom. "And do you know what that makes you?" "What?" "The best of both of us," Matthew said, pulling her close. "You have your mama's kind heart and your daddy's strong will. You're going to change the world someday." "I already am," Diane said matter-of-factly. "Mama says every time we choose love over fear, we make the world a little bit better." That night, as Matthew and Mina tucked their daughter into bed in her new room, a room with walls covered in her artwork and shelves full of books, they stood together in the doorway watching her sleep. "She's incredible," Matthew whispered. "She's ours," Mina replied, and the word ours was like a prayer, a promise, a celebration all at once. The war with his family was essentially over. They had lost not just the battle for Matthew's loyalty, but the war for public opinion, for moral authority, for the right to call themselves a family at all. Their cruelty had been exposed, their hatred laid bare, and they had been found wanting. But Matthew's victory wasn't just about defeating his enemies. It was about elevating the people he loved. He had shown the world that Mina wasn't just worthy of respect, but deserving of admiration. He had proven that love could indeed conquer all, that families could be chosen as well as born, that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the greatest vulnerability. They had won. Not just the war with his family, but the war with their own fears, their own doubts, their own belief that maybe they weren't worthy of a love this deep and true and lasting. The queen had risen, the king had found his heart, and their princess was safe and loved and dreaming of a future as bright as the stars that had witnessed their first promise so many years ago. Some love stories end with a wedding, but theirs was just beginning. Because true love isn't about the moment you find each other. It's about choosing each other every day, building something beautiful together, and proving that some promises are indeed worth keeping forever. Chapter 9. The Final Storm Before Dawn. Sometimes the darkest storm comes just before the dawn, testing not just your strength but your faith that morning will ever come. And sometimes the devil wears a familiar face, speaking words that once held power over your heart. The knock on the door came at 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in late May, interrupting the peaceful routine that had become Matthew and Mina's new normal. Diane was at the kitchen table finishing her homework, while Mina helped her with a science project about the solar system. Matthew was reading legal documents in his study, but the sound of the doorbell made him look up with a frown. They weren't expecting anyone. Their circle of trust had become small and carefully guarded, consisting of Ember, a few close friends, and the staff who had proven their loyalty through the media storm. Random visitors were rare and usually unwelcome. "I'll get it," Matthew said, walking toward the front door of their Brooklyn brownstone. Through the peephole, he saw a man he didn't recognize, tall, thin, with the kind of desperate energy that spoke of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Matthew Cooke," the man asked when Matthew opened the door cautiously. "Who's asking?" "Bob Johnson," the man said, and Matthew felt his blood turn to ice. "I'm Mina's ex-husband, and I'm here to get my daughter back." The words hit Matthew like a physical blow. This was the man who had abused Mina, who had driven her to leave with nothing but a suitcase and a 3-year-old child. This was the monster who had threatened to hurt Diane, who had made their lives a living hell before Mina found the courage to escape. "You have no daughter here," Matthew said, his voice deadly calm. "And you have no business at my door." "Oh, but I do," Barb said, his smile cold and predatory. "You see, I've been watching all the news coverage, reading about how you've been playing house with my ex-wife and claiming my kid as your own. But here's the thing. I'm still her legal father. I'm still listed on her birth certificate, and I have rights." "You signed away your rights," Matthew said, his hand moving to his phone. "You haven't seen her in 5 years. You have no claim on her." "Actually, I never signed away anything," Barb said, pulling out a legal document. "I was never served with termination papers. Mina ran away before the divorce was finalized, and technically I still have parental rights. Rights that I'm now prepared to exercise." Matthew's mind raced. This couldn't be true. Mina had told him about the divorce, about the custody arrangements, about how Barb had been removed from their lives. But looking at the man's confident smirk, at the legal papers in his hand, Matthew felt a cold fear settling in his stomach. "What do you want?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I want my daughter back," Barb said, "and I want the woman who stole her from me to pay for what she's done. I've been watching her get rich and famous, living the high life while I've been struggling to rebuild my life." It's time for some payback. Daddy, Diane's voice came from behind Matthew, small and frightened. Who is it? Matthew turned to see his daughter standing in the hallway, her science project forgotten, her eyes wide with fear. Behind her stood Mina, her face pale as death, her hands shaking as she recognized the voice that had haunted her nightmares for years. Well, well, Barb said, pushing past Matthew to enter the house. If it isn't my little girl, you've gotten so big, Diane. Do you remember your real daddy? Get out, Mina said, her voice barely above a whisper. Get out of my house. Your house? Barb laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. This isn't your house, sweetheart. This is Lover Boy's house. And soon it won't matter because you're going to be in jail for kidnapping, and Diane is going to be coming home with me. I'm not going anywhere with you, Diane said, her voice trembling but determined. You're not my daddy. Matthew is my daddy. Is that what they told you? Barb's voice turned cruel, and Matthew saw the flash of anger that Mina had described, the rage that had made her fear for her daughter's safety. Well, let me tell you the truth, little girl. Your mother is a liar and a whore, and the man you think is your father is just her latest sugar daddy. Don't you dare speak to her like that, Matthew said, stepping between Barb and Diane. Don't you dare use that language in front of her. I'll speak to my daughter however I want, Barb snarled. She's coming with me tonight, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Over my dead body, Mina said, her voice stronger now, maternal instincts overriding her fear. I will not let you take her. I will not let you hurt her. You don't have a choice, Barb said, waving his legal papers. I've already filed for emergency custody. The court hearing is tomorrow morning, and I have a very good lawyer who's going to explain to the judge how you abducted my daughter and kept her from me for 5 years. Why now? Matthew asked, his voice controlled despite the rage burning in his chest. Why are you doing this now? Because now she has something to lose, Barb said, his smile cruel and satisfied. Before, she was just a broke waitress with a kid. Nobody cared about her story. But now she's famous, she's got money, she's got a reputation, and I'm going to take it all away from her, piece by piece. You want money, Matthew said, understanding flooding through him. This isn't about Diane at all. This is about money. Smart man, Barb said. I want $10 million. Cash. And I want Mina to publicly admit that she lied about me, that she made up the abuse allegations, that she's been using our daughter to manipulate rich men. And if we refuse, Matthew asked, though he already knew the answer. Then I take Diane home with me tonight, and Mina goes to jail for kidnapping, Barb said. And trust me, I have enough evidence to make those charges stick. Before Matthew could respond, a new voice said from the doorway, Actually, she does have a choice. They all turned to see a woman in an expensive suit standing in the entrance, flanked by 2 police officers. She was tall, elegant, with the kind of confidence that came from winning battles in courtrooms across the country. Who the hell are you? Barb demanded. I'm Sarah Chen, the woman said, stepping into the room. I'm Ms. Pouille's attorney, and I'm here to inform you that your emergency custody filing has been denied, your legal claims have been dismissed, and you are currently trespassing on private property. That's impossible, Barb said, but Matthew could see the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. I filed the papers this morning. The hearing is tomorrow. The hearing was this afternoon, Sarah said, her smile sharp as a blade. And it was very illuminating. You see, Mr. Johnson, while you were busy planning your little extortion scheme, we were busy building our own case. We have medical records documenting your abuse, witness statements from neighbors who heard you threatening Ms. Pouille and her daughter, and financial records showing that you haven't paid a single dollar in child support in 5 years. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have evidence that you have been planning this extortion attempt for months. phone records, financial transactions, meetings with unsavory characters who specialize in digging up dirt on public figures. You're not here because you love your daughter, Mr. Johnson. You're here because you saw an opportunity to make money off her pain. This isn't over, Barb said as the officers moved toward him. I'll appeal this. I'll fight this. Mr. Johnson, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. If you continue to harass this family, if you make any more threats, if you so much as think about coming near this child again, I will ensure that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Are we clear? As the police officers escorted Barb out of their home, Matthew felt the last piece of their puzzle click into place. They had survived his family's attacks, weathered the media storm, and now they had faced down the final threat to their happiness. Is it really over? Diane asked, her voice small and uncertain. Yes, baby, Mina said, pulling her daughter close. It's really over. He can't hurt us anymore. Thank you, Mina said to Sarah, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for protecting her. Thank you for being brave enough to leave him in the first place, Sarah replied. Not every woman has the courage to walk away from an abuser, especially when it means facing the world alone. She wasn't alone, Matthew said, his arm around Mina's shoulders. She was never alone. She just didn't know it yet. After Sarah left, after the police officers had filed their reports, the three of them sat together in their living room, finally processing what had just happened. I was so scared, Mina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment I thought I might lose her. That was never going to happen, Matthew said, his voice firm with conviction. We would never have let that happen. Are you sure? Diane asked, still cuddled between her parents on the couch. I'm sure, Matthew said, kissing the top of her head. You're safe, you're loved, and you're home. That's all that matters. As they sat together in the quiet of their living room, Matthew felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced before. They had faced every storm, weathered every attack, survived every threat. They had proven that their love was stronger than fear, that their family was stronger than the forces trying to tear it apart. The final storm had passed, and the dawn was breaking. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to prove their love for each other. But tonight, they were simply a family, safe and whole and together. And that was more than enough. That was everything. Chapter 10. Forever begins today. Some endings are really beginnings, and some promises are made not once but over and over again, with each sunrise bringing a new chance to choose love, to choose each other, to choose forever. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of their Brooklyn brownstone like liquid gold. Matthew stood in the master bedroom, adjusting his tie for the third time, his hands trembling slightly with nerves and anticipation. After 15 years of waiting, after months of storms and battles, today was finally the day he would marry the love of his life. Daddy, you're going to be late for your own wedding, Diane called from the doorway, looking absolutely radiant in her flower girl dress, a soft pink creation that made her look like a princess from one of the fairy tales Mina used to read to her. I'm ready, Matthew said, turning to face his daughter. How do I look? Like the happiest man in the world, Diane said, her smile lighting up the room. Which is good, because that's what you are. The wedding was being held at Columbia University, under the same oak tree where they had fallen in love 15 years ago. It was Mina's idea, a way of honoring their past while celebrating their future. The guest list was small but meaningful. Ember, Phoenix Sterling, Sage Winters, Sarah Chen, and a few other friends who had stood by them through the storms. Matthew arrived at the ceremony site 30 minutes early, unable to wait any longer. The area had been transformed into something magical. White chairs arranged in a semicircle, white roses and baby's breath everywhere, soft music playing from hidden speakers. The music changed, and Matthew's heart stopped. Diane appeared first, walking down the aisle with the serious concentration of a child who knew she had an important job to do. She scattered rose petals with precision, her face solemn until she reached Matthew and broke into a grin. "I did good, right, Daddy?" she whispered. "You did perfect, Princess," Matthew whispered back. Then the music swelled and Mina appeared, and Matthew forgot how to breathe. She was wearing a dress that was simple but stunning, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate beading that caught the sunlight. Her hair was down, the way he remembered it from college, and she carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with baby's breath. But it wasn't the dress or the flowers that took his breath away. It was the look on her face, the joy and love and absolute certainty that radiated from her like sunlight. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she joined him under the oak tree. "You look like home," she whispered back, and he felt his heart expand with so much love he thought it might burst. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who had become a friend during their legal battles, a woman who understood the journey they had taken to reach this moment. "Matthew," she said, "do you take Mina to be your wife, to love and cherish, to support and honor, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Matthew said, his voice strong and clear. "I have loved her for 15 years, and I will love her for 15 more, and then 15 more after that. I choose her today, and I will choose her every day for the rest of my life." "Mina," the judge continued, "do you take Matthew to be your husband, to love and cherish, to support and honor, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Mina said, tears streaming down her face. "I choose love over fear, hope over despair, and him over everyone else in the world. I choose him today, and I will choose him every day for the rest of my life." Matthew slipped the ring onto Mina's finger, not the expensive diamond he could have afforded, but a simple gold band engraved with the words, "Until stars fall, my heart is yours." It was a match to the silver bracelet he had given her so long ago, a promise kept across time and distance and pain. "You may kiss the bride," the judge said, and Matthew cupped Mina's face in his hands, looking into her eyes for a moment that felt like eternity. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Forever." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, the small crowd erupted in applause and cheers. But Matthew only had eyes for his wife, and the little girl who was jumping up and down with excitement. "We did it," Diane shouted, throwing her arms around both of them. "We're a real family now." "We were always a real family," Mina said, pulling her daughter close. "Now we're just making it official." The reception was held at Ember's kitchen, which had been transformed for the occasion. The restaurant was closed to the public, filled instead with their closest friends and family, the people who had supported them through every storm and celebrated every victory. "I want to make a toast," Ember said, standing up with a glass of champagne, "to Mina and Matthew, who proved that love really can conquer all." "To family," Matthew said, raising his glass. "To forever," Mina added. As the evening wound down, Matthew found himself alone with Mina on the small balcony behind the restaurant. The city lights twinkled below them, but all he could see was her face, radiant with happiness and love. "So," she said, settling into his arms, "how does it feel to be married to a former waitress from Brooklyn?" "Like I'm the luckiest man alive," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What do you think happens next?" Matthew asked, holding her close. "I think we go home," Mina said. "I think we wake up tomorrow and choose each other all over again. I think we build a life that's so full of love and laughter and ordinary magic that we sometimes forget how extraordinary it is." "I love you, Mrs. Cooke," Matthew said, and the name sounded like music. I love you too, Mr. Cooke, she replied, forever and always. They had survived everything life had thrown at them: separation, heartbreak, abuse, poverty, family opposition, media scrutiny, legal battles, and threats from the past. They had emerged not just intact, but stronger, not just surviving, but thriving. Ready to go home? Mina asked finally. I am home, Matthew said, looking into her eyes. I've been home since the day I walked into Ember's kitchen and saw you again. Home isn't a place, it's the people you love. Then let's go home, Mina said, taking his hand. All of us, together. 5 years later, Matthew stood in the same spot on the balcony, but the view had changed. In the yard below, Diane, now 13 and already showing signs of becoming as remarkable as her mother, was teaching her little brother how to draw. James Matthew Cooke was 3 years old, with his mother's dark hair and his father's storm-cloud eyes. Mama, look, James called out, holding up his drawing. It's our family. That's you, that's Daddy, that's Diane, and that's me. We're all together. We are all together, Mina agreed, settling onto the porch swing. And we always will be. Tell us the story, Daddy, James said, settling onto Matthew's lap. Tell us about how you and Mama found each other again. Once upon a time, Matthew began, there was a young knight who fell in love with a beautiful princess. They were very happy together, but evil forces conspired to keep them apart. And they lived happily ever after, Matthew concluded. Did they really? James asked. They did, Mina said, kissing the top of his head. But you know what? Happily ever after doesn't mean everything is perfect all the time. It means that no matter what happens, we choose to love each other. As the sun set over their Brooklyn neighborhood, the Cooke family sat together on their porch, watching their children play, counting their blessings and marveling at the life they had built together. Until stars fall, Matthew whispered, the words that had sustained them through 15 years of separation and 5 years of marriage. My heart is yours, Mina whispered back, completing the promise that had never been broken. Their love story had become legend, the billionaire and the waitress, the college sweethearts who found each other again after 15 years, the family that proved love really could conquer all. I love you, Matthew said, as he had said every night for 5 years. I love you too, Mina replied, as she had replied every night for 5 years. And under the same stars that had witnessed their first promise 20 years before, Matthew and Mina Cooke closed their eyes and drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that their love story was far from over. Forever had officially begun, and it was more beautiful than they had ever dared to dream. The end.